Take me home, country roads. Come on, help me out. There's a place I belong, West Virginia, Mountain You guys are better than the other two services.
Hey, good morning there. Welcome to Behind the Pulpit for April the 22nd, 2025. We are in our first Behind the Pulpit post-Easter, and what an Easter it was. We had quite the extended weekend with our Thursday Living Lord's Supper performance. We had a Good Friday service where we remembered Jesus' death, and then we celebrated Jesus' resurrection with 3 services on Sunday and lots of family photos. And Pastor Dave was in the house. He was fired up. He had a long tube here. So how was that for you, Pastor Dave? You said the first time preaching 3 services ever.
Yeah, I've never done that before. I was
you had to go take a nap, or?
Did not. I was really pleased with the whole weekend. I thought the Lord added his blessing to our efforts. Thursday night, the reenactment of the Last Supper was just fantastic. Thank you, Tim, and all of the disciples.
Tim was pointing fingers. He was calling us black souls.
Was so good. I forgot he was just Tim. I was in Judas mode for a second there.
He was.
The look on his face was so angry the whole time. Like, Tim's about to kill somebody, I think. So
it's true.
Nice work there.
Well, yeah, and he did aid and abet in killing somebody.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
my favorite line was he talks about the silver being on his person. I always think it's funny when people say this is on my person.
Yeah. Tim, how was that for you, man?
It was good. I love, getting into character and stuff.
He was going to say I love Judas.
No, it was a fun part. We all had so much fun. It was a lot of fun, preparing for that. Between this and Shuttlesworth, people aren't going to know how to look at me. But no, it was fun. I had to prepare for that. I can't get into a role like that very easily. I kind of have to put myself in a weird headspace to kind of just like if you asked me to do that angry monologue right now, I don't think I'd be able to do it. I kind of have to like.
Yeah, well, I don't want you shouting like 2 feet away from me.
No, I'm not really a shouter in that sense.
Yeah, you know what I was thinking? Speaking of Shuttlesworth, we might need to have an in-person Shuttlesworth appearance in the next few weeks to talk about the success of the shuttle.
I'll ask him.
All right. Well, get back with us. Yeah, it was a good weekend, Pastor Dave. It was pretty cool. Thanks for your message, and we'll chat about that a few minutes later on.
So Thursday night attendance, it was chock full. We had people parking on King George Road, people parking on the other side of the road, and then there was a full sanctuary, no seats, scooch over, people downstairs watching from the fellowship hall.
Wow.
So that was, I think, 20 downstairs. That was like a 300-person event.
A large viewing audience on YouTube I saw as well.
And YouTube, people were checking us out.
Here's the official picture from the
hey,
there it is.
High res
Publicans.
There they are.
Now, what Tim and I were not expecting was as soon as you guys froze in that pose, do you remember what happened, Tim? The audience?
The audience laughed. A couple of people from the audience.
They did laugh. That was kind of interesting. Yeah,
that was not part of the humor content, but they thought that was funny. The freezing, I think. But it was so. Here's the thing: they know you guys, so I think it took a few minutes to go, oh wow, that's so and so in the wig, and oh look at him, and then after they sort of got over that, then it became serious.
Like, that's not John Patone anymore.
Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was great. I did notice, Tim. At some point, you guys stopped doing the pose and just kind of sat there. Was that part? Were you guys supposed to keep the pose for the whole hour of monologues?
Yes. So I think what happened is, some of us took. I don't know. It depended on the seat. Like Drew ended up sitting down, but tried to keep the same position. I tried to keep the same position the whole time. So we used.
Well, I mean, you were easy, but everybody else
was a little easier.
So you look at Tim's face.
Some people had to hold their hands up for an hour. I don't know they could do that.
So, what most of us did, I think, except Spencer, who was Thomas, he kept that finger up the whole time. He is really impressive. Dave. So we used the songs as a break.
Right.
So the songs would go, the stage would go dark. The focal point would become John and Luna, and then I would kind of straighten up, put my hands down a little bit, and then resume my position. I wasn't really. I'm sure some other people did that too.
I saw that. I saw a couple disciples sneaking some grapes.
But
during the dark times.
even Dave Mitdassel, like he put his hands down during the songs, but then he put them right back up, and he kept them there for all the monologues. So, people ask, is what's just harder, holding your pose or the monologues? And it is holding the pose.
Yeah.
Even some of the easier ones, because we're sitting on essentially just buckets.
So I do have one more question about the picture. So put it back up there. So in the original painting, what I noticed was Peter is kind of like draped over Judas with a knife in his right hand, and here he's like hiding behind you. Was that an intentional choice?
I don't know. Maybe Rob and Eddie don't know each other like that. But he kept his knife on the table just because he used it for his part. But yeah, I mean, it's tough.
Well, if you go look at the original painting, his arm is like over your right shoulder with the knife kind of, in stab mode behind there. So, but it was good. It was an excellent production and very moving. What was it like to have Ben look at you and say, "Do what you do quickly"?
I felt deserved after all those years of antagonizing him on the wiffle ball field.
Okay, so it wasn't hard to get in character.
No, we had a good time with it. I don't have it here, but we have a funny picture of us in costume where I'm holding up the 30 pieces of silver. Maybe I'll put it in after. And he's holding Peter's knife.
Feel free to insert it at any point in here. That would be pretty funny. All right. Well, that was our weekend. We'll come back to Easter in a few moments. But right now, we have some breaking news. So let's go to our In the News segment. All right. So big news story that happened just yesterday, and sort of interesting in the fact that it was the day after Easter. But the Pope Francis has passed away. He died yesterday of health complications. The day after he met with Vice President Vance, which garnered some interesting comments on social media. But he has now passed on, and there'll be obviously a funeral service in the coming days, and then the Catholic Church moves on to choosing a new pope. There's a whole process for them accomplishing that. Pope Francis was an interesting pope. He was a controversial pope. He said some interesting things over the years. I think we've commented even here on Behind the Pulpit on some of his interesting statements. So maybe we could take a moment to debrief his what do you call it? His pontiffship, his papaldom, his pope tenure. What's the official title? Do you know?
Neither one of those, but I think there is a name for that. I think this might be a good time just to talk about church leadership structure and why we might do things differently.
And that's a perfect segue into our First Timothy series, which we're going to be talking about. Good idea, Pastor Dave.
So, a lot of times Protestants just don't understand what's going on and why there's this person called Father and, why he's venerated in that way. But if you study church history, what you realize is that there were really destructive heresies being inserted into the church, and someone had to speak with authority about their views of Christ or different doctrines that were popping up. And so what they did was they said, well, we are tracing our apostolic tradition back to, this apostle, or we have an unbroken line of succession back to Peter. So in the early church, that was a way to talk about this is true, and this is who Christ is, or this is what the Trinity is, or this is what salvation is, that kind of thing. So Rome became the place to trace your teachings back to for a few reasons. Rome was given primacy because Peter was martyred there, Paul was martyred there. The population in Rome was large, so that was considered to be like a centralized place. It was also the imperial capital, and they spoke Latin, and Latin became a very great language to articulate certain theological concepts. So Rome took on like this larger than life kind of center of authority with regards to Christian doctrine, and then over time that seat of power began to be very centralized and got more and more corrupt.
Yeah.
And so eventually, obviously, the Protestant Reformation
we had
pushed way back.
A few like dueling popes. We had the Eastern Empire, the Western Empire. There was a schism, a lot of controversial popes over the years.
Yeah. So the first thing was the East-West Schism, and the East was like, no, Rome, you are not our father. They kind of had a Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker moment there.
Right.
I'm your father.
And that was the
No, you're
beginning of
not.
the Eastern Orthodox Church, right?
Yeah. The schism. And then, of course, Luther just said enough is enough. And
He nailed his theses to
nailed
the wall.
theses. And then eventually we sort of broke away from our relationship to the papacy and Rome.
Yeah.
And that's our roots. So we see things a little differently with regards to that.
Wait, one question about that. So they would consider, Catholics would consider Peter the first pope. How do they tell us how they get that?
Yeah, I mean, Matthew 16 has a certain interpretation where Peter has this confession: "You are the Christ," and Jesus says, "Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, but my Father in heaven. And I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." The Catholic interpretation of that particular statement is that Peter is the one who becomes the seat of authority in the early church, whereas the Protestant interpretation of Matthew 16 is more like Peter's confession of the fact that Jesus was the Christ is going to become the foundation of the church. And it's not on one particular person. It's on this wonderful gospel about who Jesus is. So there's different ways to interpret Matthew 16. The Catholic Church sees a primacy of Peter there. There's other statements like in John 21 where Jesus is telling Peter, "Feed my sheep." There's other statements they point to, but that's the big one where we would see things a little differently there. And so, yeah, we have a little bit of a different view of church government.
Let's see. In terms of Pope Francis and his controversies, I mean, there certainly was some very controversial popes in the Middle Ages and afterwards. I'm remembering like Pius X, or there was a couple of really controversial folks, but Pope Francis made a lot of interesting statements about the probably more recently about the LGBTQ conversation with it was okay to bless same-sex marriages, and there was another statement he made somewhat recently about that seemed to be leaning towards kind of universalism. So how would you rate Pope Francis here in the controversial Pope arena?
Yeah,
where is he on a scale of 1 to 10?
He walked the line there. So he would say that he supported civil unions for same-sex couples in public, but he also often met with and welcomed LGBTQ individuals. And it seemed like the traditionalists were sort of alarmed by what seemed to be his blurring of the moral lines. Other people interpreted his behavior or posture towards the LGBTQ community as an act of Christ-like mercy and love and just opening up dialogue. But he said some pretty iffy things. One time he said, "Who am I to judge?" regarding gay Catholics. And that was...
And people said, "You're the Pope."
That was dangerously ambiguous. Yeah, considering the Catholic Church does have a doctrinal stance about this. So he was more pastoral in his approach rather than, straight down the line of what the Catholic Catechism. He also had some doors opened for divorced and remarried Catholics to receive communion in a way that was previously forbidden, and critics saw that was morally confusing and undermined marriage as a sacrament. He also was big on the environment. He had some environmental advocacy.
Some climate change stuff.
He thought that was a moral issue. He was very critical of capitalism and unregulated capitalism. And then there was some stuff. There were some abuses under his watch with the whole sexual abuse scandal, and they said that he was a little too slow or not consistent enough to.
Yeah. Well, Latin America is the birthplace of liberation theology, so I think there was probably a little bit of that.
First Latin American pope, is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was groundbreaking. He also had something with the Latin Mass that was more limited, I think. So he was definitely pushing the margins.
Right, considered to be a more liberal pope, if we can use that, compared with his predecessor, Pope Benedict, who was definitely seen as being very orthodox and conservative.
Right.
And So
now the race is on to
It
choose
is.
a successor.
do you remember that what they do is I guess they all get together and then at the end there's like there's smoke that comes up and when you see the white smoke, a new pope has been chosen.
Yeah.
So we'll see some white smoke here.
And usually that's a few weeks, so we'll see. It's probably a cardinal that's going to be promoted.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about. There's a few folks that are in the race here. The one that is I saw a lot about is the guy from Africa, Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo. I think I'm saying that right. Archbishop of Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he was apparently very critical of Pope Francis. He's also quite would be considered quite conservative, and he's on the younger side of the people becoming pope. He's only 65. Usually, a lot of the more recent folks have been chosen in their mid 70s. Now they wind up living a long time, but a lot of people were being chosen older. I remember we were talking before we started filming that when Pope John Paul II became pope at 58, and he was pope for decades, like 30 plus years, right?
Most of our childhoods. Yeah.
So I mean, but he was young and had lived a long time. So you got
youngest pope ever was Pope Benedict IX, who became pope at age 20.
20.
Yeah, that was back in
That's
the
like younger than
11th
Tim.
century.
My goodness.
But that was during a very corrupt period. So most of the time they're a little bit older, a little bit more experienced.
They didn't live as long back then either. So
that's also true. Yeah.
But, so there's that guy. There's Cardinal Mario Grech, the General Secretary for the Synod of Bishops. He is he's from Malta. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State of the Vatican. He's 70.
He's like the safe choice. He's moderate, pragmatic.
Yeah.
He's kind of like number 2 right now. Like he's like next in line.
Yep.
So that would be my guess if we had to wager. But
there's Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa. He's a Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, and he's only 60. He's spoken out amid the Israel-Hamas war and visited Gaza during the conflict. So there's that guy. All right, there's others. You can go find them online. The African guy will be an interesting choice. I think he'd be the first African Pope. So if we're all into first, everybody's got to be a first nowadays. We'll see what happens.
I don't know that they care about my vote, but that seems like a good idea.
There you go. Just his picture. He looks like that'll be a good Pope. Let's make this guy Pope.
Right.
All right. Okay, so that is that's the Pope. Anything else in the news? You know what, Pastor Dave? We missed a couple weeks ago the direwolf. Maybe we should talk about the direwolf for a second before we move on.
Okay.
Since it's Easter, let's talk about resurrections.
I saw this story and I was somewhat terrified by it. So, for the first time ever, an extinct species, I don't know if it's exactly the dire wolf, but this is what they're calling it. It has a lot of similar attributes to the dire wolf.
They used a lot of DNA from a gray wolf, so people were saying it kind of looks like the dire wolf, but really it's a gray wolf.
Yeah, so maybe not exactly.
I guess it's kind of like when in Jurassic Park when they made a Tyrannosaurus, it was kind of like a frog because they used all the DNA of similar species.
I don't remember that. Tim, do you want to talk about this?
Sorry. Yeah, from what I understand,
over 30 years later, it still
oh
sticks.
man, they at first I thought we bring it back to direwolf. I'm like, oh, they found it. They found the DNA in the amber and the mosquitoes. Whoops, that's later. And then it's like, oh well, it's mostly we found a little bit of DNA, but then we took a lot of DNA from the gray wolf. And it's like, so it's not a direwolf. It's a hybrid.
So the story is that Bioscience has announced the birth of 3 direwolf pups, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi. And they were created through a combination of ancient DNA analysis, gene editing, and surrogate dog mothers. So they have direwolf traits, but they're not a perfect genetic replica. And this is the first in a new wave of what's calling the de-extinction process. And there's a couple more.
This is a movement.
The dodo
in the
bird's
docket.
coming back.
The de-extinction
The dodo
movement.
bird, I heard, and also the woolly mammoth. They would like to introduce those 2 species into the population. And who knows what else? That's kind of where we are So science fiction is
Where
becoming
does
reality.
it end here, Pastor
Are they
Dave?
going to give
What else should we
a hair
de-extinct?
transplant? Is that what's going to happen?
A what transplant?
A hair transplant. Give an elephant a hair transplant, and boom, the mammoth's back.
Oh my goodness. Maybe that. I don't know. Yeah. So we'll see. Exciting times.
So
Scary
the
times.
question is, should these things be done? What's the purpose of de-extincting the woolly mammoth? What benefit is that going to bring to society other than just to say we did it?
The biologists are bored.
I guess. I mean, is it gonna have some kind of help to society? And that the thing that I always point out with these endeavors is that there is something called the technological imperative, which states that just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do something. So the question is, why are we doing this? Oh, look, here's a cute puppy. I mean, the dire wolf kind of looks like a white husky. So it's cute, but what's it going to do? Look at that thing. That's huge. That woolly mammoth right there. It's got a huge tusk.
Yeah.
How to make a mammoth?
That's a good question. Why? I don't know that I have a good answer for that. So.
Yeah, I don't either. But we'll keep our eye on that story as well as the Pope process. We'll see what happens and who takes over the papalship in a few weeks, and who gets to ride the Pope mobile. That's like looks like the most fun thing to do is
The
the
Mercedes?
Pope. You get to ride in the Pope mobile in the crowds and kind of lift up your hand and they get excited.
Imagine if Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a Mercedes.
Yeah, that's the new donkey, I guess, of the 21st century. So, all right, so there we go. That is it. Let's move on to our book segment, and I do have a recommendation, but Pastor Dave brought one himself, and maybe we should just focus on yours today, Pastor Dave.
So, Pastor Bob and I have been working really hard.
I'll save my recommendation for later on. Why don't we just...
our new book, We Need a King. It took us many months.
That.
We've been working on this since the summer of 2023.
Commentaries on the cover here, Tim. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Let me see here. I think, I love it.
We're pretty pumped about it. It's digestible. The goal was to get it under 200 pages. We accomplished that goal, except for the appendix, but we accomplished the goal mostly. And it is a wonderful reminder of the kingship of David and all of the lessons that were part of that particular story. So we're very proud of this.
And it goes along with the Amazon series, The House of David. Yeah. So we just kind of coincidence that I guess it was the divine sovereignty that we would be releasing it at this point.
Yeah. So we would encourage you to pick up a copy, and we think this will be a blessing to you. All the proceeds from our book sales do go to the ministry of Millington Baptist Church, so it's a way of supporting the church and getting a great book in your library and being blessed.
Is
by
that
the
a signed
story.
copy, Pastor Dave?
It is not.
My
but
copy's half signed.
If you would
Half
like
signed?
Yeah,
a signed
Bob,
copy,
I got to get you to sign mine.
Bob and I would be glad to do that for you.
I think Amy has lined us up for book signings at various ministry events.
Yeah.
So
Coming to a Barnes & Noble's
just show
near
up
you.
and see if I can, take it.
Yeah.
So check it out. It's on Amazon or Kindle, your preference, and we're excited.
If
Good
you
book.
subscribe to Kindle Unlimited, it's part of Kindle Unlimited, so you can read it that way.
Right?
Yeah, good. So there it is. We Need a King. We'll come back to the book war next week. I'm going to save my recommendation until then, so that I don't lose. Do we
We're
have
having a truce for this week.
One of the things we can do? Do we have the results from last week, Tim?
Oh, yeah, we can go over
Let's
the
go with
results
the
from last
results.
week. I think
We're just going to say just get our book, and that should be your vote. But what happened last week?
So
I forget what I recommended last
week. It was
week.
a tie.
It was a tie.
It was no. So it was the score was tied until someone won, and that person was Pastor Dave.
Oh,
my
Bobby.
goodness.
The pitch was awesome. We can go back to that. Like, you need this on your bookshelf, kind of a thing. And we got some votes. We got a wasn't a shutout, but 80-20.
Oh, right. Alphonse.
Alphonse.
we won't
Alphonse
tell
will be
Alphonse
disappointed.
about
We
that.
won't
So
tell him.
friend of the show, Alphonse.
Alphonse lost to Boving.
Lost.
We'll tell him.
Man, Bovink's never been on one of our shows.
All right.
And now that brings the score up to 11-12. So all you faithful voters, you get a week off because there is no book war this week. But that is the score.
All right.
Stay
So,
tuned.
Be praying about next week. It'll be a big week.
Might be a 2-pointer.
It might be. We'll see. Okay, so now that the book recommendation segment is done, we don't have any charts that I saw today. So why don't we move on to your sermon, Pastor Dave? So we are now fully done with 2 Corinthians. I kind of did the wrap-up, pre-wrap-up last week, the end of the book, but we jumped back and we did chapter 5 on Good Friday and on Easter. Mm-hmm. And I guess we can talk about Good Friday too, because it was all part of chapter 5. Mm-hmm. But why don't you give us a summary of what you talked about? You had some pretty pithy points and some interesting props. Give us a summation of what happened on Easter.
I was going for prop of the year with the hose. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 is a unit of scripture that talks about Paul's theology of the afterlife. He has undergone a lot of suffering and is being comforted in his affliction. But in chapter 5, he explores the possibility that perhaps one of these persecutions or one of these sources of suffering may result in him passing on to glory. And Paul says that's actually a great thing. We have a building from heaven that belongs to the Lord, and one day we're going to inherit all of the promises of God through resurrection. So it's a hopeful chapter. It's great for Easter, so that's why we kind of saved it for that. I chose to have 4 different units there, and I think they do break up in the text. So the first thing was about facing your mortality, and then we talked about examining your own morality, and then changing your mentality, and finally experiencing or embracing your new reality. So it's a wonderful chapter about Paul's view of what happens after we die and what we should be ultimately aiming for and living for in this life, which is to please Christ, because we will stand before him one day. The cool thing about this chapter that's kind of hard to understand theologically is the Bible does speak about a new creation one day. And if you read the footnote to 2 Corinthians 5:17, it actually cites Revelation 21 or Isaiah 65, which are passages which talk about the new heavens and new earth. So 2 Corinthians 5:17 is saying, in some sense, that new creation has begun now. And if you are in Christ, then you are participating in the new thing, as Isaiah the prophet said, the new thing that God is doing in this world. And so there's sort of an already but not yet thing going on there.
Bringing us back to the inaugurated eschatology,
eschatology
we spent so much time on in the fall.
Yeah, and so Christ is at work inside of us, and that is a great hope that he takes that which is old and makes it brand new.
What was the, just as a side note, who was it the some of the post-millennial folks that will talk about the church being the actual new creation? Did they use this verse as a citation for that?
Yeah, I wanted to chase down that, and I didn't have time, but I think so. I think that would fit together with the fact that they think that we're actually living in the New Jerusalem right now, and that was all just an apocalyptic picture of the beautiful church age right now. So that's a legitimate view in partial preterism that right now we are in the new creation.
Alrighty, there you go.
I don't know if I totally agree with that, but
it's out there. I know, but I was just asking that is the justification for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. Well, let's talk a little bit about each of these points. So the first one, you were kind of getting us to think about. Well, actually, let's start with the morality piece, because I think that's one of the things that people wrestle with nowadays. Is Christianity good? How do I live? How does the new morality affect my view of Easter? How does that connect in?
Well, after we die, there is an accounting. There is a judgment seat, and then every created person has to actually be examined by their Creator. And so there is one man that was risen from the dead, and he has been appointed the judge who will return one day and reward that which was done in the body, whether good or evil. So that's a complicated concept, because there's sort of a different sense in which the believer is experiencing the judgment seat versus the unbeliever, and how they're experiencing the judgment seat as well. So I didn't get a chance to go into the weeds here theologically, but perhaps I can do that on this show, since we get weedy sometimes on Behind the Pulpit.
Let's get weedy, man. So, give me my Wheaties here.
So in 2 Corinthians 5:10, he says, therefore we all must stand before the judgment seat of Christ. The word all there is universal. Everyone has to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And I think we have to understand his statement about the judgment for good works in the body. And is he saying that we're saved by our good works? Is that what he's implying there? I don't think that we want to say that. I think we want to instead, here's a quote I didn't put in my sermon by Anthony Hoekma. He says, quote, "Faith must reveal itself in works, and works in turn are the evidence of true faith." And so that's how we understand that from our perspective, that it's not that we are meritoriously earning our standing with God, but that our faith should be pregnant with good works. And if it's not pregnant with good works, then that faith is proven to be not genuine. As the book of James would say, faith without works is dead. So that's sometimes hard to understand.
Yeah.
But we all will give an accounting there. And some people understand that to be a distribution of rewards for things that are done in the body. Some people understand that to be the fact that Christians will be rewarded with the presence of Christ only. So there's some different ways to think about that. I know you talked about Blomberg has a view on that as well.
Yeah, he's more the latter. Well, and actually, speaking of the Revelation piece, so that ties in with the Revelation 20 and the judgments that are seen there. Is this? I'm forgetting. Is this? So sometimes people see there's a judgment for unbelievers, and then there's a judgment for believers. The Great White Throne is for unbelievers.
And then the judgment seat of Christ is for believers, where we receive rewards that are distributed for works done in the body. But like it says in the book of Revelation, we cast our crowns before the Lord Jesus' feet. It's because of him that we've been able to even do any of these good works.
Yeah.
So, we have to examine our morality and understand our lives matter. What you do in the body matters. I think that we should have a sober view of that. Let me just read something from the Westminster Confession that speaks to this reality. So this is something that the church has taught throughout the ages. So Westminster Confession 33:1, quote, "God hath appointed a day wherein he will judge the world in righteousness by Jesus Christ, to whom all power and judgment is given by the Father, in which day not only the apostate angels shall be judged, but likewise all persons that have lived upon earth shall appear before the tribunal of Christ to give an account of their thoughts, words, and deeds, to receive according to what they have done in the body, whether good or evil." So we believe that. That's something that we would hold to be true. Sobering.
So examine your morality. Change your mentality, Pastor Dave. So you talked here about how the resurrection reorients our motives and how that should obviously change the way that we live. Easter, if nothing else, should change our view on life and our actions. So what did you mean by this? This was a bit of a pithy statement here, and there was that really wonderful verse about Christ's love controlling us. How does Christ's love control us? Some people don't like this whole controlling language.
Yeah. So to be a Corinthian was not only to live for the moment, but to be a Corinthian was to talk yourself up. So they had this issue with boasting. Remember, there was these super apostles that were boasting, and Paul is showing them a different way, and he's saying, we're not going to be commending ourselves this way. We're instead going to be living or making it our aim to please Christ. That's what we're going to be doing with our life. So that word for aim is the word for our exclusive pursuit or what we are trying to do. And I think when we live for ourselves, this becomes, I think, it's just too low of a goal. It's too low of a bar. Paul says, come up higher and live for something greater than yourself. Live to please your Creator and your Redeemer, the Lord Jesus Christ. I think that's what we're called to do. And I think there's some interesting Greek words that I didn't get a chance to do the word study for Easter because it was a little in the weeds. There's a complex Greek term where he says,
tell us everything that you took out of the sermon.
Yeah,
right
I
now.
took so much. I had 20 minutes worth of stuff that just didn't make the cut. So there's a complex Greek term there that's aiming to please him, comes from two words, love and honor, the love of honor. Like his ambition is to honor God. That is what he wants to do now with his life. So that's his mentality. He's changed his entire mentality. And I think that's the way we're supposed to live our lives. We're supposed to change our mentality. And then he has this weird thing where he says, if we're beside ourselves, it's from God. So that's the Greek term ecstasis, where we get our English word ecstasy. And so he's saying sometimes we're going to be perceived as crazy. And if so, that's because we are placing our trust in God and in God alone, and we're radicals, we're Jesus freaks, and that's going to be the way we're perceived at times. So kind of embrace that.
Yeah.
That's not something we can
I
avoid.
think that's the same word that he uses to criticize the Corinthians in chapter 12 or 13 when I was, he's kind of talking about them wanting to go up to the third heaven, and they're so focused on that. Yeah. Lastly, embrace your new reality. So we have new life, new creation, new hope. How does that impact me each and every day?
There was some examples I gave at the end of the message of people who've been really transformed by the gospel, and I didn't even share all the examples that I had, so I could have went on and on and on about people who were once one way who had a total transformation and became another way. I talked about Kat Von D. She was a former witch. I talked about Jeff Durbin, who was, a drug addict. He's the guy who played Johnny Cage in Mortal Kombat. Now Jeff Durbin's a pastor. He heads up Apologia Ministries, Apologia Studios, Apologia Church. You probably have seen him on the internet. God changes people. He has the ability to take that which is old and make it brand new. So the illustration I gave here was the classic illustration of this, of the caterpillar turning into a butterfly. That's a picture of what God can do inside of a person. And his transformative work is amazing. He makes it brand new.
Kids were super excited about the egg and the butterfly.
Yeah, did your daughter get a egg with a butterfly in it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
She shouted at you in that
Yeah.
one service. You have a statement here on your outline. Jesus didn't come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people live. Now, I thought that when I became a Christian, I became a good person. So, what do you mean by this?
Yeah. So I think sometimes we get stuck in moralism or performancism, or we sometimes get caught in the trap of I need to clean up my act and pull up my bootstraps and start acting better and behaving better. And that's a very white knuckle way to pursue pleasing God. And it's you can do that for a while, but it will not be long lasting. Instead, the gospel says the way in which we're changed is that we understand our view of ourselves and our sinfulness to be growing and expanding every single day, every single month, every single year of our lives. We uncover more darkness inside of us, and then we also grow in our understanding of God's holiness and glory, and we realize how much more grace that we need as well. So the way in which we are to use the law, which is appropriate, so people who use the law to make themselves better by their own strength are not using the law lawfully, which is what 1 Timothy 1 says. The way we're to use the law is allow that law to search our hearts and then reapply the gospel to those areas and embrace the good news of grace. And we grow in the Christian life in the same way in which we began the Christian life. So growing in grace actually requires grace. We cannot do this. This is God's work. This is the Spirit's work inside of us. We are helpless. Asking a person with flesh to become good is like asking a person with no legs to run a marathon. We don't have that capability in and of ourselves. The illustration I like to give is like, imagine you drove your car into a ditch and you hooked up some ropes and attached the ropes to a bunch of kittens and tried to have the kittens pull your car out of the ditch. Well, they just don't have the strength. They just don't have the power to do the work, to do the load. So it is the gospel and the grace of God alone which is able to help us to overcome and to have victory in the Christian life. So that's what I mean by the gospel doesn't call us to just be better people. It calls us to become new people, and that's the good news of grace. So it's not good advice, it's good news, which is what you said Friday night.
On Friday night. That's right. Jesus didn't come to give you a better life. He came to give you a new life.
So let me just turn the tables here. So after the new creation thing is when Paul begins to talk about this ministry of reconciliation.
Yes.
So
yes.
What is that about? There's 3 more verses in this chapter.
3 more verses. Yeah, we talked a little bit about how we need to be receive the
4 more verses. 18, 19, 20, 20.
Four. But I had 3 points on Good Friday. So Good Friday really is the the really famous verse at the end of chapter 5, he became sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God, which is what theologians call the imputed righteousness, that when Jesus went to the cross, he took all of our sin, he took all of that on top of himself, and we got his righteousness, which doesn't seem fair, and it's not, but we get the new life because of Christ's work and what he did for us on Good Friday. But he talks about the ministry of reconciliation, and that's the idea. And I talked a little bit about how that word reconciled is actually not used very much in the Bible, but it's a very biblical central concept that's particularly drawn out at the end of 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And it had the sense, that word, katalasso, of reconciling gods and humans. And the crazy thing about Christianity is that in all the Greco-Roman religions, even in Judaism, if you were going to make reconciliation between you and God, it was always about you coming and doing something so that God would accept you. But what Paul says is that in the Christian story, in the gospel message, it's about God himself coming to earth and doing the reconciling himself by his work on the cross. God the Father sending the Son to die in our place for our sins. So, that in some sense, the word ministry is the word where we get service from. Jesus came and served us by going to the cross. Paul talks a lot about that in Philippians chapter 2. And then he talks about the message that needs to go out to everybody. And in order for that to be accomplished, we need to become ambassadors of this message. And an ambassador in the ancient world, and even today, is somebody who goes out and represents the interests of his nation or state to the world abroad. And so in that sense, we are to go out and represent the kingdom of God to this dying world and tell people about the message of what Jesus did on the cross to bring about reconciliation between you and God the Father. So we talked quite a bit about that on Friday night.
Tim, would you be able to put a chart in if I were to email you one?
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
So can you go back to this? So you talked about being the messenger and almost like being the town crier, like you were saying, be reconciled to God, be reconciled to God.
That's the message.
Like we're like a carnival barker or something like
or the bullhorn guy in Times Square, just kind of shouting.
That's our job.
Yep.
And so that's the ministry of reconciliation that we've been given to charge other people to be reconciled to God. So this is what we're supposed to do.
Yep.
So the chart I wanted to talk about is
in order to become the new other people become the new creation.
Right.
Yeah.
So the chart I wanted to talk about is the difference between some people's understanding of 2 Corinthians 5:21 and other people's understanding. So you taught the Protestant understanding of that, which is an imputation view. So
right.
The Catholic understanding of this is an infusion view. So here's the chart for today. There's always a chart. Never fear.
I'm putting it in.
It's like always ready to go. So the Protestant understanding is that justification is a one-time event that occurs by faith alone. We are given a forensic or like a legal declaration of righteousness before God as he credits Christ's merits to our account.
Yes.
That's imputation. That's how we're justified according to the Protestant understanding of the doctrine. The Roman Catholic view, and I'll try to represent this as fairly and as accurately as I can here, is that justification is a process. It's a process that occurs by faith and works as we are infused with righteousness first through baptism and then through the other sacraments throughout the Christian life.
Well, there we go.
So there's two very different ways of understanding how we are justified, how a person is made right with God, how a person is reconciled to God. So in the Catholic view, the means of justification is through baptism. That's when a person is infused with the grace of justification. That's why you get baptized as a baby. So unless you are baptized as a baby, you are not washed of your original sin. So in this view, your righteousness is infused at baptism, and it remains there in you until you commit a mortal sin. Then you lose it. And then you have to walk the second plank of justification, which is the sacrament of penance. And so in the Catholic view, justification is not a one-time event. It's a process, and that process will not be complete until one day, usually they say after purgatory, when we're totally purged of sin. And in that way, the Catholic view has a different understanding of assurance of salvation. And so...
is it fair when people criticize the Catholic belief to say that they think a Catholic would say you're saved at least partially by your works? Because in the Protestant view, you would say we are legally declared righteous, and then our works are evidence of the fact that we have a changed life. Right. And then we go through a process of sanctification, of becoming more like Christ. But if this view of infusion from Catholicism seems to mix those two up, or rather invert them.
However you cut it, there is human works involved in the process of salvation. Now, we're engaging in the 7 sacraments, which the Catholic Church would say, no, those are means of grace, and we're actually receiving what Christ has stored up in what's called the treasury of merit for us, and then our works are giving us access to that righteousness. But there's a human element involved without which we cannot be receiving the grace of God. Now, the Catholic critique of our view, and just to be fair, they would say this whole idea of justification by faith alone, you're righteous right now, is a legal fiction. What are you talking about? You're righteous right now. You're not righteous right now. Look at the way that you live your life. And they don't think you can be called righteous till you actually are fully righteous. And so that's why this doctrine has divided us for 500 years. That's why there's been a split in church history. And, my view is that I think Luther was right. I think he understood 2 Corinthians 5:21 in the correct way. I think that righteousness is an alien righteousness that's been given to us as a gift. And so not all controversy is bad. I mean, we want to seek church unity, but I think Luther used to say peace if possible, but truth at any cost. So this is the gospel, and he refused to negotiate that with anybody.
But isn't it, again, this idea that in those early religions, there was some sense of you had to do something in order to bring about the reconciliation between you and the God.
Right.
So in some sense, you're kind of saved, but you're not really saved. Right. In that view, you still have to do stuff. You still have to do the penance to bring it before the God, which is a callback to the earlier religious ethos.
Right. Yeah. So this is similarities there, but this is important. This is the gospel. Yeah. If we get the gospel wrong, Tom Schreiner says we get the most important thing in the world wrong. So now that's not to say, anything negative about Catholic friends or family that we have, and I know we have many Catholic friends and family. We're talking about the official dogma, the doctrine of the Catholic Church, and just critiquing that from a theological perspective right now. So what does the gospel teach? We believe it teaches imputation, which is what 2 Corinthians 5:21 is all about, in my view, and in your view.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're done. That's it. 2 Corinthians in the books.
Now 1 Timothy. Give us a quick preview about 1 Timothy.
Moving on. This is one of the unique books in the Bible that was not written to a group of people or a church. It was written to a person. And so Paul is writing to his protege Timothy about how to build a healthy church. What's the blueprint for a sound church? And there's lessons that are wonderfully applicable. It's so practical. So we're going to discover what is God doing in the world today through the church, and how does a healthy church operate? And we're looking forward to diving into that topic for the next couple months.
Right. We're going to get into some very practical matters, some that are divisive.
Very divisive.
But they're matters of practicality, and so at some level it's understandably divisive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So bring your Bible Sunday. We're going to dive into our new study this weekend.
I'm diving in. I'm going deep.
Yes, we are.
That's going to be over our head, man.
Oh, man.
All right. We decided by executive order that we will not be doing the theology sprint today. So should we do some announcements to wrap up this morning?
Yeah, I think we only have 2 because you just plugged one of them. So here is the first one.
Christianity Explored. Hey, if you know somebody who has questions about the faith, or you yourself that are watching this has questions about the faith, or if you want a refresher on how do I share my faith, this is a great course for you to come to. It's beginning on May the 4th, Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you on that day, 10:45, the second service in the Youth and Family Ministry building. You can go register online for that. The first week we are going to have some food, so if you're hungry and you want to take part in the kickoff, mark your calendar.
A 1045 vehicle.
1045. Yeah, we don't do those very often, but we're going to give this a try and see what happens.
All right.
So we're back to our 2 services, 9 and 10:45.
Yes. Yeah, no more 3 services. All right, VBS, July 14th to the 18th. Go. Registration's open. Get on it. Boom. It's going to be a good week.
True North.
We're going up to Alaska this summer and seeing the mountains.
Oh, yeah.
I'll be interested to see what happens on stage for the VBS this year. All right, Pastor Dave, concluding thoughts?
Thank you guys so much for your volunteering and serving on Easter weekend. That took an army of committed Christ followers to make this weekend possible.
My goodness, look, Tim just popped up some pictures right there.
Those are some good shots. We realized that was a tremendous effort on our church's part, but God was glorified. Christ was lifted up. We had a fantastic weekend. Thank God. To him be the glory of Thursday night, Friday night, Sunday morning. God is up to something at Millington Baptist Church, and just anecdotally, I've been texting with other pastoral friends of mine across the country. Sunday was incredible for a lot of churches. Record attendance numbers, conversions. There's something. Aslan's on the move, man. There's something happening right now in our society, and people are coming out to church. People are coming out to worship and pursue the Lord Jesus. I think we're recognizing that the troubles in this world have a spiritual diagnosis and a spiritual solution. And so people are looking to Jesus, and it's an exciting time. So this is a great time at Millington. Just wanted to say thank you for helping us and serving so faithfully. God is using you, and you guys are the best.
Part of something bigger than yourself.
Yep. We aim to please him.
Amen. All right. Well, we will see you back next week as we debrief 1 Timothy, and we will we'll keep on keeping on. Have a great week. God bless.